I'm very pleased to have an excuse to get out of my office and into the real world of the bureaucracy of the United Nations and to be in a university and academic setting. I think the last time was when I left university myself over 20 years ago. So I was very pleased to be able to come and participate in an academic event. And I also was pleased to receive the draft, the PDF file of the book, which is now going to be presented today, of which I had a quick look through in presentation today. And I think I wanted to say it's a very important contribution, this academic discourse and discussion on gender issues in Central Asia. And I'm also very pleased by looking around the audience today to see that there's a pretty good gender balance also of the people listening. Which to me is a very positive sign and shows progression, let's say, in the attention of the issues to gender in Central Asia. So it's not only gender equality, as we know, is not a women's issue, it's an issue for men and women. When we speak of gender equality and the access of both men and women to have equal access and opportunity in different levels of society, different aspects of society. So from that point of view, it's very good to be having this discussion and having your participation here on a Friday afternoon. I also wanted to comment on, I looked a little bit into the background of the conference that was held in 2012, which led basically to this book. And the main goal of the conference being to make a forum of exchange among young scholars across Central Asia, but also with European countries, is also to be commended. And I also noted at the end of the book, there's this resolution, resolution it's called, from the conference, where certain points are stated for follow-up, and that's always good to have some concrete action after the conference. So turning to the substance of the matter, UN Women, as you can imagine, we take on the issues of women's empowerment and gender equality every day. This is my life right now. I mean, working on all issues, and as our multi-country office is responsible for 4 of the countries in Central Asia, UN Women has a separate country office in Kyrgyzstan. I'm very involved and know the situation, including also in Kyrgyzstan, but in particularly in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And I personally myself have been, from my studies, I did Soviet studies actually, so that I know a bit about the background and history of this part of the world, but also since 15 years ago, I have been engaging with Central Asia with the countries when I worked for the OSCE. So my comments are also related a little bit to the trends and the progress, let's see, that I've seen from the past to what I've witnessed in the last little over a year that I've been based in Kazakhstan, but also traveling frequently to the countries in the region. And I wanted to start with the point that was made in the introduction of the book, which on the very first page, I think it even is, there's the figures on the Human Development Index of the different countries in Central Asia. And there's a direct correlation between the high human development ratings that are given with the high gender development ratings, you can call it. Actually, the ratings are on inequality, so they're kind of the opposite. So the lower inequality is obviously implies higher development. And what you see is that the development of the higher developed countries have the least gender inequality as well. So that, by scientific fact, let's say, shows that there's a direct correlation between development across society in different sectors, from health to education to business to political participation, also shows that in those countries that the advancement of women and gender equality is at a higher and more advanced rate. So that was very interesting to show that the facts themselves can show and can prove. And I also wanted to link my remarks to the issues raised in the book, or some of the main topics raised in the book, because I felt that was the most relevant. And there were 3 particular themes. There were many themes in the book, but 3 in particular that were raised, which I think are of great importance in Central Asia as concerns gender issues. And those 3 issues that were raised were labor migration, domestic violence, and religion as impact on, in particular, women, but in general, on gender issues. And so I wanted to just say a few words about each of those topics and the challenges and opportunities that at least I can see from my perspective in our work on gender equality in Central Asia. And then also make some kind of proposals for how these issues might be addressed. I have to admit at this point, I have no idea how long I'm allowed to talk, so maybe.
Well, the office said 5-10 minutes, but.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
sorry, okay, well, I can be fast. Okay. On these particular issues, indeed, labor migration is a key issue within the region because of the difficult economic situation in many of the countries of the region. So, for example, it's very well known that from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, for example, you have huge amounts of labor migrants, including an increasing percentage of women, up to 30% even, actually, according to unofficial statistics. Official statistics, I think, put it around 15%, but unofficial, it's up to 30%. And even in countries like Moldova, it's already up to 50% of the labor migrants, but Moldova is, of course, not in Central Asia. So the trend is increasing where you have more and more women participating in labor migration, and you have more labor migration taking place due to the difficulties in the economic situation. And many of those labor migrants are coming to Kazakhstan, of course. Further, they go to Russia. That's the main two countries of destination for labor migrants in the country. And we see an increasing trend in, as I mentioned, the participation of women, and even to the point that, for example, in Tajikistan, children are being left behind. So the father or the husband has gone on labor migration, and then that's not enough. So then the mother and wife goes, and the children are left behind with the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, etc., which puts increased burden on the family structure, but also on the children having to be raised and not having parents around at home all the time. There's also another phenomenon that actually we work, actually our office has big projects on labor migration in Central Asia, and we have a specific project which focuses on abandoned migrant wives in Tajikistan, because there's an increasingly number of women who are being affected by their male spouses, their husbands, who immigrate mainly to Russia, because mainly to Kazakhstan are coming more domestic workers as opposed to construction workers, which are more often female. But you have an increasing number of women in society in Tajikistan who have been abandoned. And abandoned we defined as being left behind for 6 months or more with no contact with their husband, no money being sent, no contact. So after the 6 months point, they're considered to be abandoned. So, and at this point, they have to not only continue to raise the children and take care of the household, but now they're in a position where they have to also raise money for economic sustenance and to take care of their household. So this is an increasingly and worrying phenomenon, particularly in Tajikistan, for example, that the numbers of households that are being left behind and not taken care of create increasing burden, in particular on women in most cases, and children, of course. And the domestic violence issue is also one that's known. It's actually domestic violence is existing in every country around the world, unfortunately, and has even recently been seen in studies in Western Europe where even surprising results came out that up to 1 in 3 women at some point in their lifetime had experienced some form of domestic violence. And again, I know you're all academics and you probably know this, but just to say that domestic violence is not just a man beating the wife or a husband beating the wife. Domestic violence can take many different forms. It can be economic pressure, it can be harassment, it can be psychological pressure. All of those, when we talk about domestic, fall under the term when we talk about domestic violence. And domestic violence means exactly that, violence in the home. So it can also be the other way around, which sometimes, unfortunately, there are also cases, or even in some countries in Central Asia, you have cases of mother-in-laws beating the daughters-in-laws. So that's women to women, let's say, but it's still domestic violence. And I think it's important to raise these issues again, so when we're talking about gender equality, we're not just talking about, the standard stereotypes of domestic violence means the husband beating the wife. It's also against children, and different members of the household, through violent acts against children. So all of that, we're talking about domestic violence. But in general, the statistics are such, and the information is such, that generally women are much more victims of domestic violence than, or females and women than men are. But I just want to raise it so that it's can go all different ways. And the economic situation is also contributing to the situation with domestic violence, because when there's stress and depression in the economy, the household becomes more stressed, difficult, and can lead to tensions if the husband or the wife, for that matter, can't find work, there's no income. This increases the stress and increases the domestic violence. And just last week, I was in Dushanbe for the SPEC Economic Forum, and was very interested to hear the member of the Women's Committee in Tajikistan, who was speaking at the same session that I was on Women and Economy, specifically raised this point in her remarks in this forum, which one was significant that it was raised in a semi-public setting in what is considered to be a rather traditional society, but also that the linkage was made, that the poor economic situation is contributing to domestic violence. So the challenges that we face with domestic violence are twofold. One, the prevention, and the other is the provision of services to survivors of domestic violence. And a lot of support and interest has given into the provision of services, working with law enforcement agencies so that victims and survivors are properly treated and received and registered and not, sent back saying that's your fault, go talk to your husband and work it out when you get home. I could talk for a long time on this topic, but we don't have so much time. So there's a lot of focus on the services and encouraging the state to step up to the plate to provide those services in a professional way, to ensure that law enforcement bodies are trained, which means judges, prosecutors, lawyers, police, different aspects of the system. But it also has implications on the social sector, the health of the woman, the psychological well-being of the woman, of the children also in the household. So it goes across, the service provision needs to go across quite a broad range of areas. But what has not so much been focused on, and something that we are particularly focusing on, is the prevention side. Because I always am saying that domestic violence shouldn't be just treated as an illness that exists in society, and all we're trying to do is treat the illness. Let's say cancer. We do a lot to prevent cancer. Let's say medicines being discovered, research, etc. And we should devote sufficient attention also to prevention of domestic violence. And by prevention, say, okay, well, what can you do? What can you do? Well, part of the issue is working with understanding in society of gender stereotypes and how we understand gender in society and roles of men and women in society. And making the distinction between biological function and roles in society and how, those roles in society can be interpreted in different ways depending on the context. So we try to put a lot of focus into awareness raising and work on discussion and stereotypes, and that's why such a forum like this is also very good. So I presume after all the presentations are done, there also might be some discussion and questions. So it'd be interesting also your views on that. And I want to link this with the last point, religion, because I know I'm over my 5 minutes already, so to move forward. Because religion and culture, for that matter, are very often utilized when discussing about particular issues of domestic violence or the role of women in society. Our culture doesn't have these roles for women or for men, for that matter, and therefore we cannot accept this way. This is a Western way. But of course, the standards are all written in international human rights documents, which are legally binding documents, international human rights conventions, which all countries of Central Asia have ratified. So they are obligated to follow these international standards. So it's not a matter of culture or religion when we talk about interpretation of norms, international norms. And we could get into a long discussion, I'm sure, to interpretation of religious law and things like that, depending on what religion people have. But the point of the matter is that there is a means, there is a way to respect the roles of men and women in society and balancing them out, irrespective of religious considerations and cultural traditions. So that's an important factor, but that is still a very big challenge in Central Asia, in particular going forward, because very often this is cited as a reason for not achieving basically gender equality or not taking certain measures to go forward to improve the situation of gender equality. So if we look forward-looking, now that we've looked at some of very lightly, of course, at the challenges based on the 3 themes of the book, I wanted to just say a few words on, from my view, what are some things that could be done going forward, and like I said, probably later we'll have some sort of discussion. And a lot has to do with awareness raising and people being aware and having knowledge. As they say, what is the expression, knowledge is power, or something like that. No, just there's an expression, I can't remember exactly what it is. And it's indeed that. I mean, when we find that through our work, women and men gain more knowledge and more information. What is gender equality? What does it mean? It's not just being feminist or women's rights or something like that. It's much broader than that. And particularly when you talk about rural women who are very isolated, don't have information, or men for that issue, that situation as well, that when they find more information, they're empowered because they know what their rights are. They know who they can turn to. They know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable according to law, according to international law. And that very much helps in this situation. So a lot of what can be done is providing this information to people. And then secondly, I mentioned on the prevention side, again, addressing stereotypes. This is, to my mind, we have a lot of work to do in this area, particularly in this region, to have open discussions and debates, also in academic fora, but in the media, in different aspects. Social media can also be on TV and different forums, to really discuss and put out in the open, what is it when we're talking about gender equality? What are people's understandings of men and women in society? And why can't men work at home? Why is it culturally is not functioning or not accepted? What are the barriers to that? What are the barriers to women getting out in the workforce, to participating in political decision-making and higher levels throughout society? So all of that are all issues that are very linked together. By having this discussion, providing information, we can also address stereotypes. And then, as I mentioned, this also contributes to working for prevention, for example, of domestic violence, prevention of other forms of discrimination and harassment that take place at the workplace, in the educational sector, in the health sector, for example, when you talk about reproductive health and other issues. So there's a lot that can be done when we talk about raising awareness as a way to contribute to achieving gender equality. So that's just a few remarks, a bit longer than maybe was originally intended, but I think it sets a basis, for us to hear from the other speakers, particularly on the topics of the book, and then hopefully we'll have a very good discussion. So, thank you.